Please, just let me stay. I don't eat much, just feed my child, said the desperate mom to the lonely cowboy rode by. Wyoming Territory, late October 1874. The sun sagged low over a cracked horizon. Cold winds swept dust into ghostly spirals, and brittle sagebrush snapped in the gusts. Distant hills loomed like dark shoulders beneath a fading orange sky. Asa Thatcher rode alone. His coat was patched, hat pulled low over a face hardened by wind and silence. His horse moved at a steady pace, just enough to outrun the dusk. He'd spent the day replacing a busted fence post on the north line, hands raw from work that dulled the soul more than the body. He didn't talk much, hadn't in years. The war had taken his voice for a while. The fever that followed took more. His wife, his boy. What remained was land, habit, and the slow weight of breath. Then something moved on the trail ahead. His horse huffed and slowed. Asa narrowed his eyes. Through the dust, he saw a woman stumbling, clutching something tight to her chest. She raised one hand, staggered a few steps, and collapsed in the dirt. Asa pulled the res. She didn't move for a moment, then slowly shifted, wrapping herself tighter around what she carried. A child. Please, just let me stay. I don't eat much, just feed my child. Her voice cracked like dry bark. She didn't lift her head, only rocked the boy gently, whispering something in his ear. Asa stayed mounted, watching. She wasn't begging, not really. Her voice didn't plead, it protected. There was something fierce beneath her collapse. He dismounted. Her eyes lifted. Dirt streaked her cheekbones. Her hair had fallen from its pins, sweat damp and tangled. Her lips were split. The boy, maybe 3, lay limp in her arms, his small face hollow, eyes closed. "What's your name?" Asa asked. She blinked slowly. "Marin Sloan. This here's Cal." He studied the boy. The child barely moved. Too quiet, too light. There was no panic in her eyes, just endurance, worn thin. "Where's your horse?" "Didn't have one. Lost the wagon 3 towns east." She coughed. A dry sound. "We've been walking. Heard there were ranches. I just thought I'd try one more road." Her arms trembled, but she stood straighter. The wind picked up again, pushing her dress against her legs. No wagons in sight, no footprints behind her, just wind and grit. Asa knew what the safe thing was. Say no. Close the door. Let someone else be the fool. But he looked at the boy again. And something ancient shifted inside him. Not mercy, but memory. He turned his head toward home. "The end's dry," he said at last. "You can stay the night." She didn't cry, didn't thank him, just adjusted. Cowl in her arms and stood. Her leg dragged slightly as she followed. They walked together. The ranch came into view. Faded walls, weary fences. One yellow lantern burning in the kitchen window. Asa led the horse through the gate and kept walking past the house and toward the barn at the far edge of the yard. The wind moaned low between the boards. He stopped and opened the door. "You'll find hay in the back. Cat's rough but clean." Marin paused in the doorway, looking into the shadows. Then she nodded. "That'll do," she murmured. More than most. Asa didn't wait to see if she went in. He turned, boots crunching in the dirt, and walked back toward the house. The sky had gone from gold to blue, the stars beginning to spark. He reached the porch, stepped inside, and lit the lamp. Then he stood at the cupboard, staring at the row of tin plates. He reached for one, paused, and took down 2. The barn was colder than it looked. Wind slipped through the warped wood and whispered between the boards. Hay lay scattered, rope coiled by an empty stall. The lone cot sagged in the back corner. Marin knelt beside it, Cal still in her arms. She didn't speak as she unwrapped her shawl and tucked it tightly around the boy, then cupped her bare hand over his forehead to block the cold. He shivered once. His breath was shallow, eyes closed, but not asleep. She sat down back to the stall wall, not bothering to brush away the hay. Asa had left her without a word. But not long after, his boots returned. The barn door creaked open. In his hands was a battered tin bowl of boiled potatoes, still faintly warm. He said nothing, just set the bowl down and turned to leave. "Wait," she said, not loudly. He paused. She reached out and took the bowl with both hands. Her fingers trembled. She split one potato apart with her thumbs. Thin steam curled up. She lifted a piece to Cal's lips. "Come on now, baby. Just a bite," she whispered. The boy didn't open his eyes, but his mouth parted. She fed him slowly. Small bites, gentle coaxing. She didn't eat. Outside, Asa leaned against the barn post. Through a crack in the wood, he watched. Marin kept breaking small pieces, placing them against Cal's lips. When he'd had enough, she set the bowl down and licked her fingers once lightly, as if to remember the taste. She pulled Cal close again. She didn't lie down. Her hand rested on his ribs, counting breaths. She didn't pray. She didn't cry. She just held her boy like he was the last fire left in her world. Asa watched a moment longer, jaw clenched. Then he turned back toward the house. Inside, the cabin was dark. He didn't light a lamp. The hearth was cold. He rinsed his hands, wiped them on the cloth hanging over a chair. He stood at the cupboard a long while. Then he reached up and pulled down another tin plate. Quietly, without thinking, he set it beside his own. 2 plates, one for him, one for something that wasn't pity, wasn't habit, maybe hope. He sat in the dark, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the dead hearth, wind pressed faintly at the windows. He didn't know why he brought her food, or why he stood watching her feed a boy who barely moved. It wasn't kindness. It was memory, the echo of a voice at midnight soothing a fevered child. The way she held that boy, not begging, not ashamed, like she was the last line between him and the world. He reached for the firewood, then stopped, and sat back, letting silence settle like dust. Out in the barn, Marin pressed her cheek to Cal's hair, her hand still rising and falling with his chest. Her other hand gripped the edge of the cot just enough to stay upright. Wind slipped through the slats like fingers, searching for warmth. The potatoes had gone cold, but the boy was still breathing. That was enough for tonight. The morning wind hit hard. It howled through the bare branches and slammed low against the barn roof, making the old beams groan. Frost clung in thick edges along the water trough, and the sky was the color of tin. Asa opened the barn door just after dawn. He had come to check the mare's feed, maybe make sure the woman hadn't vanished in the night like some desperate ghost. What he found instead made him stop in his tracks. Marin was kneeling on the frozen dirt near the pump, sleeves rolled to her elbows, bare hands sunk deep into a basin of icy water. She was scrubbing cloth, diapers, maybe a shirt against a flat board using a small brush made from tied straw. Her breath came out in pale puffs. Her cheeks were flushed red from wind exposure, lips cracked. The edge of her dress was hitched slightly above the ankle. Her right foot was twisted outward at an unnatural angle. The boot worn thin. The exposed skin near her sockline was raw. Purple bruises cracked and flaking where old blood had dried. She did not notice him watching. Her eyes were locked on her hands, moving with tight, efficient rhythm. From behind her, Cal let out a sudden fit of coughing, a rough, dry sound that turned sharp at the end. She dropped the brush, wiped her hands on her skirt, and turned fast. "It's okay," she murmured, kneeling by the boy, who sat propped against a folded sack of hay. His little chest heaved. She puffed her cold, wet hand and pressed it against his back. "Baby, in out, that's it." Asa stepped forward, gravel crunching beneath his boots. "You'll make yourself sick," he said, voice low but sharp. Marin didn't turn around. "Some of us already is," she answered. "I can't afford both." He clenched his jaw, breath visible in the cold. He wanted to say she was being foolish, that she would be no help to that boy dead, that frozen hands meant infected wounds, which meant fever, but he said nothing. She went back to scrubbing the cloth, slower now. The water in the basin had gone pale with soap and cold. Her knuckles were red and beginning to swell. He turned and walked away without another word. At afternoon, he passed the old lumber pile behind the tool shed. There were a few good pieces of pine that had dried right. He stared at them for a minute, then hauled one onto the sawyers and began cutting. He measured by eye, no need for plans. His hands remembered enough. It took just over an hour to shape 2 thick curved rails and a set of shallow legs. Parts for a rocker. It would not be pretty, but it would be solid. When he was done, he left the pieces just outside the barn door. No explanation, no note. That evening, when he returned from checking the western fence line, he saw her sitting on the barn's edge, piecing the cradle together with a broken-handled hammer and a few old nails. Cal sat bundled nearby, holding a pine shaving like it was a toy. She didn't ask why he made it. He didn't ask why she knew how to finish it. By sundown, the little cradle was upright, rough but sturdy. Marin laid an old blanket inside, then carefully lifted Cal and settled him in. The boy curled on his side, thumb in his mouth. Marin stood up slowly, back stiff, and looked at the finished work. And then, so faint it nearly passed unnoticed. She smiled. It wasn't wide, it didn't last, but Asa saw it. He was halfway across the yard, filling the wood bin by the porch, when he looked up and caught it. A smile. It stopped him cold. He stared a second longer than he meant to, because the last time a woman had smiled like that on his land, she had been standing barefoot in the doorway, laughing as their boy reached for her braid. That was 6 winters ago. He dropped the log in his arms and turned away before she noticed him watching. But the echo of her smile stayed with him well into the night. The first days passed like thawing ice, slow, hesitant, fragile. Mornings came gray and cold, but inside the cabin the air had begun to shift. Cal was stronger, still pale, still prone to startle awake with a sharp breath, but his eyes were clearer now. He laughed when the fire popped too loud and clung to his mother's side like her breath kept him upright. Asa had moved them into the house 3 days after that first storm. No announcement, no explanation, just cleared a corner near the hearth and laid out an extra blanket. Marin did not protest. She picked up the few things she had and walked inside like it was something temporary but necessary. Like shelter was not something she trusted to last. In the quiet hours, she stayed busy. Her hands always moving, stitching, folding, rocking the boy. She cut small squares from the scrap basket in the pantry, frayed old shirts and discarded flour sackcloth, and slowly pieced together a shape. 2 ears, a small head, button eyes salvaged from Asa's drawer. She made Cal a rabbit. Each time she laid him down, she tucked the toy close to his chest. When he stirred, he reached for it. The fear never fully left his face, but it no longer owned it. Asa noticed things. The way Marin hummed when she stirred the stew pot. The way she lined Cal's boots near the door with the toes pointing out. The way she sat at the table, but never quite let her back touch the chair. One evening, he brought in a small block of wood from the shed. He didn't tell her why, just sat near the fire and carved while Cal slept nearby, cheeks pink from sleep. The rhythm of the knife was steady, quiet. The next morning, a small wooden spoon appeared on the table beside her plate. She looked at it, then at him, said nothing. But for the first time, she ate every bite of her portion, even licked the edge of the stew bowl clean. Later that same meal, she spoke low over the rim of her cup, cradling Cal against her hip. "You don't have to do this." Asa didn't look up. I know." That night, the cold rolled in thick. Wind howled like a dying thing outside. The hearth burned steady, but the chill still found its way in through the cracks. Cal woke with a fever. Skin hot, breath short. He whimpered and curled tight against Marin's chest. She tried cool rags, rocking, humming the old tune she used when he was teething. Nothing worked. Panic crept into her voice. "Cal, baby, come on now. Stay with me, please." Asa moved without a word. He pulled a jar from the cabinet, a thick root and dark liquid, and measured out a spoonful. He brought it over, gently pried the boy's lips apart, and helped Marin tilt the medicine down his throat. Then he laid one broad hand across the child's forehead. His touch was awkward, unsure, but steady. "Breathe, little man," he whispered. "Your mama's stronger than most." He sat beside them the rest of the night, his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the fire, while Marin, exhausted, leaned her head against his shoulder. At some point, her hand found his coat sleeve and stayed there. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. In the early gray of dawn, Marin moved slow around the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair still sleep-tousled. She rinsed dishes in silence. When she opened the drawer beside the stove to put away a cloth, she paused. There, neatly folded, was an old woolen scarf. The thread was fraying at the edges. On one corner, barely visible, was a stitched initial, M. She ran her finger over it once slowly. Then she wrapped it around her neck and went back to the stove. By the time Asa came in from feeding the animals, she was flipping cornbread and humming under her breath. She didn't ask if she could keep it. She just wore it and cooked breakfast like she belonged. Asa paused in the doorway. The light from the fire hit her face just right, color returning to her cheeks, lips curved slightly, that scarf around her neck. He stared for a moment. It had been years since anyone had worn that scarf. Years since a woman had stood in that kitchen and moved like it was hers. And for the first time since the fever took everything, Asa did not feel the sharp bite of memory. He just felt quiet and still and whole. The letter came folded in rough parchment sealed with the sheriff's mark from Clearwater, 20 miles west, 2 days' ride if the rivers were passable. Asa opened it at the table, the morning light barely cresting over the hills. He read the words once, then again, his hand curled around the paper tighter each time. A stranger had come into town asking questions about a woman, brown hair, limp in one leg, with a boy, quiet type, looks tired but dangerous, name Clayton Rush. The name pulled something tight behind Asa's ribs. He folded the letter and tucked it into his coat. When Marin came in from tending to Cal, he was already pulling on his boots. "You going somewhere?" she asked. "Checking fences," he replied. "North line." She didn't question it, didn't see the way he paused to secure the revolver at his side, or how he scanned the horizon 3 extra times before stepping off the porch. From that day forward, Asa rode the perimeter each morning, silent and slow, one hand always near his hip. He told her nothing, but something in the air had shifted. That night, long after supper, the wind rose and rattled the shutters. Marin had just rocked Cal to sleep when his little body jerked in her arms. His eyes rolled back, limbs stiffened. "Cal," she whispered. He didn't respond. Then came the tremor. His arms shook violently, back arched. A soft, choking gasp left his throat. "No, no, no, no," Marin screamed, clutching him tighter. She fumbled with the blanket, trying to unwrap him, trying to cool him, trying anything. Panic drowned her voice. "Cal, baby, come back, please." Asa burst in from the hallway at the sound. One look was all it took. He crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt, and gently but firmly took the boy from her shaking arms. "Get water," he said. Calm and steady, she ran for the basin. Asa laid Cal down on a folded quilt near the fire, holding the child's head steady. He wet a cloth and pressed it to the boy's neck, then to his wrists, whispering under his breath. "Easy now. Stay with me. That's it." Marin dropped beside them, watching, frozen. Asa reached out with a trembling hand and placed it gently on Cal's back. He began to rub slow practiced circles just like he used to, just like before. Minutes passed. The seizure slowed. The boy's body slackened. A moan left his lips small and dry, but alive. Marin collapsed beside the child, her knees folding under her. She didn't cry, didn't sob. She just breathed in short, jerky gasps, eyes wide and unblinking. "I left too late," she whispered. "The others, they didn't make it." Asu said nothing. He sat beside her, quiet. He didn't touch her, didn't offer comfort in the form of pity. But he shifted just enough for their arms to rest nearly side by side. Not touching, but near. She felt the warmth of his sleeve against her skin and leaned ever so slightly closer. The fire crackled low. She closed her eyes. He watched the boys sleep. That night, Asa didn't go back to his room. He stayed by the fire, boots still on, revolver at his side. The letter burned slow in the hearth hours later. He didn't need the sheriff to tell him what kind of man Clayton Rush was. He already knew, and whatever happened next, he would be ready. The sun was high, but the wind carried a chill that sliced low across the fields. Dust curled in little ghosts along the fence posts. The horses were restless in the pen, picking up the scent of something wrong before men even spoke. Asa was splitting wood when he saw them. 2 riders, one leading, one shadowing. The first was tall, rangy, with a face carved in smirk. His coat was too fine for trail work, boots polished, hat too stiff. He rode like a man who believed the land owed him for daring to be born on it. Beside him, the other man sat heavier, slower, eyes flat like pond water, hands resting too close to the holster strapped low on his thigh. They stopped at the front gate. Asa didn't call for Marin. He didn't have to. She was already at the window, pale as linen, Cal clutching the edge of her skirt. The lead rider held up a folded packet of papers sealed in red wax. "Name's Clayton Rush," he said loud enough for the wind to carry. "I believe you're harboring my brother's wife and his collateral." Dasa stepped down from the porch, slow and steady. The axe was still in his hand. He let it fall into the stump with a dull thunk, then walked to the fence and rested one boot on the lowest rail. Marin stepped just inside the doorframe. She didn't speak. Her hand shook against the wood, but she stood upright, keeping Cal behind her. Clayton grinned when he saw her. "There she is. Thought she could vanish out here, did she? Poor thing never did understand law. You see." He held up the papers again. "She broke a contract. And that boy, he ain't hers. Not legally. He's named in the debt means he's mine." Asa said nothing. Clayton's grin slipped a notch. "I got a signed order from a magistrate. That woman belongs in court and the boy belongs with blood. My family's blood." Still no reply. Clayton gestured to the hired gun who adjusted his reins and began to reach slowly for his belt. Asa moved only his eyes. That was enough. The hired man froze, hand inches from iron, and said under his breath, "This ain't worth the coin." Clayton turned irritated. "You go yellow on me, Ray." Ray shook his head once. "I go living. Big difference." The silence was thick, heavy, stretched tight like barbed wire. Asa stepped closer to the gate. "Just one footfall, calm, measured. We ain't no one crosses that fence," he said, voice low. "Unless they want to dig their own grave." Clayton's eyes narrowed. "I'll bring law next time." "You do that," Asa replied. "And bring shovels." Clayton stared a second longer, then jerked his his horse backed up, restless beneath him. Rye followed without a word. They rode off without looking back. Only when the dust settled did Asa turn toward the porch. Marin was still there, frozen. Her shoulders trembled, and her hand had baldled the fabric of her skirt tight enough to leave wrinkles. Cal peeked around her leg, blinking slowly, not understanding but sensing. Asa didn't speak. He walked up the steps, past them both, and opened the door wide. Then he looked Marin dead in the eye, not questioning, not comforting. "Is there a still here?" She let out a shaky breath, her shoulders dropped. Cal pressed his face into her thigh, and she lifted him into her arms without a word. Inside the kettle began to whistle. Asa turned to take it off the fire. He poured 2 mugs, sat at the table, and waited. Not because he was polite, but because he had drawn a line. And for the first time in a long while, someone had stood behind it with him. The road to the county courthouse stretched wide and bitter. A ribbon of frozen ground winding through open plains and pale sky. 40 miles of wind, silence, and breath like smoke. Asa rode ahead, leading the way. Behind him, Marin held Cal in front of her. Both arms wrapped tight around the boy as they moved with the rhythm of the trail. Her shoulders ached, her thighs burned. Twice she nearly slipped from the saddle, but each time she straightened without help. "I can ride," she said when Asa looked back. "Do not lift me down." He didn't argue. By the time they reached the courthouse in Red Hollow, her lips were cracked from cold and her legs numb, but her spine stayed straight. Inside, the air was dry and tense. The sheriff met them in the outer hallway with a furrowed brow and a folded paper in his hand. He's got documents," the sheriff muttered, handing them to Asa. "Filed them clean. Looks like adoption papers, notarized and sealed. But the signature's forged yours apparently." Marin took the paper, scanned the bottom line, and narrowed her eyes. "Thinks paper makes it real," she said, folding it once, then again, then slipping it into her coat. "Let's see what the judge says." The courtroom smelled of old wood and ink. The benches creaked with every breath. A clock ticked too loudly in the far corner. Clayton Rush stood tall in his best coat, hair oiled, chin up. His lawyer sat beside him, a small man with a big briefcase full of falsified legitimacy, stamped, sealed, paid for. Marin walked to the front with Cal's hand in hers, her boots echoed on the wooden floor. The judge was old, stern, with skin like bark and a voice like cold iron. "Mrs. Sloane," he said, "do you have proof of abuse?" She stood silent for a second too long, then lifted her chin. "I have scars," she said, voice shaking but steady. "I have a boy who survived. And I have the truth." Clayton scoffed behind her. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Scars are not documentation, ma'am." Asa stepped forward. He had not meant to speak, but the words had lived too long inside him. She didn't steal, he said. She saved. That boy's alive because she chose to run. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Heavy. Final. The judge looked from Asa to Marin, then to Cal, who clung to his mother's skirt and blinked up at him with weary eyes. He nodded once. This court finds no legal merit in the claim submitted by Mr. Rush. The papers are fraudulent. The custody remains with Mrs. Sloane. You are free to go. Clayton stood up fast. This isn't finished, he snapped. The judge didn't look at him. Paylife, he said. Escort Mr. Rush out. The door slammed shut behind Clayton a minute later. Marin turned slowly, heart hammering. She looked toward the man who once owned her name and her pain. And for the first time, she didn't flinch. Her hands stopped shaking. Her eyes did not lower. She stood still, shoulders squared as Clayton Rush was marched from the room like a man who had lost a bet with something bigger than law. Truth choice, a mother's will. And when the door closed behind him, she exhaled, not in relief, in victory. The wind had calmed by the time they rode back. The clouds that had hung heavy for days finally broke apart, letting golden light spill across the hills like forgiveness. Asa sat tall in the saddle, reins loose in his hands. Cal rested against his back, head tucked between Asa's shoulder blades, a small stuffed rabbit cradled in one arm. His breathing was soft and even. The sleep of a boy who knew finally he was safe. Marin rode behind them, one arm looped around Cal to steady him, her forehead resting gently against Asa's back. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, the wind on her cheek, and the quiet strength of the man in front of her, all of it told her one simple truth. She didn't have to run anymore. She let her eyes close for a moment. It was the first time in years she didn't fear tomorrow. When they reached the ranch, Asa dismounted without a word, then turned and lifted Cal from the saddle with practiced ease. The boy murmured in his sleep, but didn't wake as Asa carried him into the house. Marin followed. She paused on the porch, hand brushing against the doorway. The wood was the same. The steps creaked the same, but everything had changed. It no longer felt borrowed. It felt like home. That night, the fire crackled low, casting warm light across the table. Cal giggled as Asa trotted a carved wooden horse across the tabletop, making soft snorting sounds and a dramatic neigh that made the boy erupt into peals of laughter. Marin laughed, too. Not a polite smile, not a careful breath, a full bright laugh that reached deep into her chest and opened something long sealed shut. Arson looked up, startled by the sound. She met his eyes across the flickering light. I've never felt safe long enough to ask this, she said quietly. But do you want us here? Not just out of duty. Asa didn't answer right away. He sat down the horse slowly, then met her gaze and held it. His eyes didn't waver, didn't blink. I want you here because you're the first thing I've let myself want in years, he said. You and that boy, you make this place feel alive again. He reached across the table, voice low. Marin, I don't know much about saying the right words, but if this is what love feels like, quiet, strong, and steady, then I'm already in it. Her breath caught. She reached out and took his hand. Calloused, rough, scarred, but warm. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, I've been claimed by fear, by pain, by men who only saw what they could take. But with you, I'm not claimed. I'm chosen. Asa stood, stepped around the table, and pulled her gently to her feet. They kissed slow, uncertain, trembling. Not out of desire, but out of something deeper, a fragile kind of courage, a quiet promise that said, I will not leave when you break. I will hold you when you fall. The next morning, the sky was soft with light. Dew glistened on the fence posts. Asa walked the line with his gloves in one hand and hammer in the other, behind him. Small footsteps thudded across the dirt. Pa! Cal called out, his voice bright as froze. The boy ran up and hugged his leg. He smiled, placed a hand on Cal's head, and whispered, well, now that's a word I ain't heard in a long while. On the porch, Marin stood in the doorway. One hand rested lightly on her belly. She hadn't told him yet, but the look she gave him said everything. Hope, trust, love. In the wild, cold West, two broken souls didn't just survive. They found family, found warmth. And found a reason to stay. Not out of desperation, but out of love. If this story stirred something in you, a heartbeat, a memory, a longing for a kind of love that fights through silence and survives the storm, then you're one of us. This is Wild West Love Stories, where every tale is dust, danger, and devotion. If you want more stories where broken hearts find healing in wide open skies, where love rises from the ashes of loss, and where even the loneliest trails lead home, subscribe to the channel. We've got more coming. More stolen glances, more untold sacrifices, more moments that'll make you pause and breathe deep. So saddle up, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, and remember, sometimes the strongest love is the one that doesn't need saving, just a place to belong. We'll see you down the trail.